She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, a straight dog is nice. She's a pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
Welcome, Transformation Talk Radio listeners. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. Welcome to my show, Recovery Recharged, where we share advice and support from experts in addiction and recovery. I am so thrilled to have this guest on this morning, not only because he's also a born and bred New Yorker, even though I'm the pushy broad from the Bronx and he is definitely the pushy bro from Brooklyn, but I am so glad to have Thomas Gagliano on the show with us today. And let me tell you a little bit about him and what we're going to talk about today. Tom holds a master's degree in social work and a bachelor's in business. He is a sought-after expert and speaker and has appeared on many famous TV and radio programs, which you guys all know, like the Jenny McCarthy Show, Dr. Oz, Sirius XM, and his podcast can be found on Spotify as well. Mr. Gagliano is also the author of a couple of books that he's going to talk a little bit about with the famous Dr. Adam Twerski. And I know that was his first book, The Problem Was Me. He does provide family-focused individual and couples consultations. He has experience and expertise from overcoming his own abuses as a child. We are going to talk today about the impact of childhood messages with best-selling author Thomas Gagliano. So the pushy broad from the Bronx and Recovery Recharged is thrilled to introduce my guest this morning, Tom Gagliano. Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good. I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Not that anybody could tell I'm from Brooklyn, of course, but we'll just go with that, right?
I love that. Listen, the Bronx is going to come out in me. You start talking Brooklynese, the Bronx is coming straight out. So we're going to be very comfortable.
Are you kidding me? Of course.
Great. Really great. You have such a fascinating backstory. I want to concentrate on that for just a little bit. Tell me what prior experiences in your life got you into this field.
Well, I'm a recovering addict, of course, and I've been in the rooms for 35 years. I sponsored a lot of people, been sponsored. I started to facilitate groups in my basement, steps 1 through 12 at a time. And then I moved towards childhood messages. I learned a lot in school through my own therapy, my own overcoming own shortcomings. And I started to realize how important childhood messages are, and how they really dictate the roles we play in our lives, the intimacy we have or don't have, our parenting skills, how impactful they are. And that's how I started to do what I do today. Coming from a bad childhood, I had a dad that was an alcoholic, and when he came home, he was violent. He would either hurt me or my mom, and my mom was a kid herself. She'd take me to hotels to catch my father with other women. She'd knock on the door, leave me at 8 years old in front of the door, move away, and my father would see me, or the woman would see me, and the fireworks would start. And I want to say just one thing that's so important. A child that doesn't feel like they matter to their parents, they won't stop loving their parents. They'll stop loving themselves. They feel like they failed. And at 8 years old, I didn't say my father should go in AA. I said, what's the matter with me? What's wrong with me inside that my father doesn't want to be with me? That sentence is profound, and I find it in a lot of my clients, not only addicts, but in other areas too, where they're suffering internally from depression and anxiety.
So tell me, you were an only child, correct?
No, I was 4 brothers, but I was the oldest. I was the caretaker, which we'll get into. That role I was set up to play. I was supposed to take care of things. Sometimes many of us play the people pleaser, where we just don't know how to say no. the caretaker, the defiant role, where we're always combative, the perfectionist, where we never have compassion for ourselves when we stumble, the invisible role, where we get lost in our relationships. All of these roles, I believe, are set up from early childhood messages.
You're absolutely right. And we do so many things, and you've covered so much. So I want to just come back a little bit and talk a little bit about your first feelings in this regard. Your mom was obviously in a marriage that was somewhat unhappy for her. I know that you and I are, somewhat in the same time period. We're boomers, certainly, so that our parents grew up in a way that it was very hard, or there was no such thing as really getting a divorce, because that was not done at that time. And you said you have grown up being an adult child of an alcoholic, meaning your father had a problem and he was also unfaithful in marriage. And your mother kind of used you in some ways as a human shield for what was going to happen next. And I'm sure that very definitely affected your recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like in school for you? Tell me the story of school.
Well, first of all, I was parentified. I felt early on.
What is parentified?
That means I had to fill my mother's needs with my father. I wasn't allowed to be a child. I had to move up on the scale and make her happy if I wanted to be happy. This is what happens to caretakers. All of a sudden, their happiness relies on making other people happy first. It's not healthy. I have to make myself happy first. Self-love, self-care. My happiness can't rest on how I make other people happy.
That's the true definition of codependence, when we are so worried about other people's feelings that we cannot function until the other person is okay. And you
100%.
Learned that from 8 years old, correct?
Yep, I learned.
All right. So bring us to school now. What was going on?
Well, I was a very angry kid. I was always in trouble. But the amazing thing, what happened to me, is my father, who I hated more than anybody and loved more than anybody, he's the one that set me straight. He's the one that got me right.
How did he do that?
Well, I was in recovery, but I was half in, half out. I wasn't really completely in recovery. And my father, who was in AA for 15 years, was really a different person. He was a changed man. And I remember he had cancer. He was dying. My mother said to me, "Go see your father in the hospital. He's not going to live long." And when I went to the hospital, an amazing miracle happened. I sat near him and we were talking. And when I got up, he grabbed my hand. He was all hooked up to morphine. And he said to me, "Tom, I was sitting near my father 20 years ago, and he was dying of cancer. I never was able to tell him I loved him. I never was able to tell him that I cared for him. I don't want that to happen to you." And he started to cry. I never saw my father cry.
How old were you?
I was already in recovery. I was in my 30s.
Okay.
Yeah. And at that time, I didn't see, recovering addicts don't know how to regulate discomfort. They don't know how to regulate uncomfortable feelings. We only know to go to destructive entitlement and use to ease that pain. I had to learn how to do that. But at that time, I didn't know how. I got up from the hospital and my father was crying on my shoulders, all hooked up. And I left that hospital room and I wanted to act out. I wanted to go to any damn addiction that I could go to, multiply blessed. Here's the miracle. The elevator door opened and there was a guy from one of my 12-step programs that happened to be there visiting somebody else in the program. And I walked over to him and I hugged him. And I know later he told me, "I didn't know you liked me this much, Tom." But I was hurting and I was dying and I was praying to God, "God, help me, please. I'm ready to go use again." I didn't know how to regulate this emotion I had with my father.
Based on what your father said to you, it was overwhelming. Is that what you're saying?
It was overwhelming. I never heard feelings in my whole childhood. My father called me little girl if I should cry or if I should show feelings. And I was overwhelmed. And this guy was there, I believe, sent from my higher power to nurture me because I was going out again. But here's the miracle. My father passed away, and in the funeral, the wake, 15, 20 people from my 12-step program came to see me. Me. See, Ellen, I mattered. I mattered for the first time in my life. I felt like They were there for me. I was important to them. I'll never forget that. And that's what sent me full thrust into the 12 steps. Being a compulsive person, I was running step work in my basement. I met Dr. Abraham Twerski. I wrote a book. I went back to school for my master's degree. And let me tell you, I hate school. Ellen, I hate school. I couldn't stand it. When I walked out that first day, I looked up and I said, God, I hope you're getting a kick out of this. I had my little loose leaf book, my little pen and pencil, and the craziest thing happened. I couldn't find the building. I couldn't find the room. I couldn't find anything. And I walked into the wrong building, walked in to ask the professor where the hell to go. I was fit to be tied. He turned to me and he said, Tom, what are you doing here?
And it was the same man in the elevator.
This was a guy that I helped. He was a sponsee of mine. I helped him get back in his marriage. And the professor, he walked over to me, my sponsee, he hugged me. Imagine the talk in the Rutgers auditorium that day, everybody who saw this insanity. And he said to me, Tom, I'm going to tell you what you told me. He says, I'm going to tell you saved my marriage. And you told me to get my feet where they should be, even when your head doesn't want to go there. And I'm telling you too, God sent you here for a reason. And later on, I did get my master's degree in social work, and I graduated from Rutgers.
Well, you certainly learned an awful lot, and it's certainly a recovery story that we can all relate to in some way. There's no question. So let's bring it into a little bit of the present. When did you write The Problem Was Me?
I wrote a manuscript, and some guys in the program introduced me to Dr. Abraham Twerski. He read the manuscript and he said, we got to get this book out, not only for recovering addicts, but for therapists, psychologists. They got to learn not the outsides of the addict, because we come in all different colors and sizes and religions. What's going on the insides? That's what you got here. What leads to destructive entitlement, that we stop caring about how we hurt ourselves and others? What is the mask that we all wear because we're really trying to hide the feelings we have inside, feeling like people will let us down, feeling like we're defective, feeling like we're not good enough? We got to get that book out. And that's what led me to write the book, which I did. And through the grace of God, it became a bestseller. I found a lot of clients for my podcast. And that's what led me to where I am with the book.
When you talk about the mask that people wear, what mask do you think you were wearing?
I was wearing the mask from the caretaker of childhood, taking care of everybody. I wore the mask that I can do anything. Successful businessman, looked like I was a great family man. I wore the mask of courage, of strength. Underneath, I was broken, I was hurting, and I wouldn't let anybody in, Ellen. Nobody was going to get close to me. That's the problem with addicts. We don't trust a process we can't control because we've been hurt. But addictions are symptoms. They're not the problem. The problem is the brokenness inside. And if we don't fix that, we'll go from one addiction to another. We'll switch seats in the Titanic and think that in this seat, it's going to end up better. And it won't. And the biggest problem with addiction is it's a disease that tells you you don't have an addiction. And I have seen too many of people in program that thought they could handle their addiction that are in the cemetery today. And it kills me.
You know, it's really something what you just said, and I want everybody to hear it out there. Tom just said an addiction is a process that tells you you don't have an addiction, right? That is absolutely 100%.
And
I have a couple of clients that have turned around and said to me, after having, of course, newbies, all right, if you're 2 years, if you have under 2 years, as far as I'm concerned, you're a newbie, okay, which means you have just an early recovery. I've had a couple of clients say to me recently, I think maybe I can handle a drink or two on occasion, right? Or maybe I can, smoke pot occasionally. In which case we go through. So what do you say to this? Tell me what you say to those people. What would you say? I'll tell you what I said, but what would you say?
I tell them, when I hear clients say I can handle it, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
You're in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
And
there's the red flag.
Cemeteries filled with those that thought they could handle their addiction. You can't be in charge of the process. You know, Ellen, I've realized that my clients, there's two willingnesses to get better. One is the willingness to get help, to show up to 12 steps, to go to a therapist, to go to a sponsor. But here's the toughie, the willingness to take direction. Can I allow that person, my gods with skin, I call them, my witnesses, those that know my truth, could I allow them to dictate my thoughts and my actions? Can I do that? Can I go that far? Because remember, recovering addicts, most of us are very distrustful because we've been betrayed or we've been hurt. So now I have to do what's hard for me and give trust to other human beings. But those that are willing to take direction, boy, do I look like a great coach and therapist. I look amazing. And
I
those that
understand.
don't, I'm going to fail. It's really that simple.
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, this all is a part of step number 2, because as far as I'm concerned, a power greater than myself is not only my higher power or my higher being or somebody that maybe I choose to call God, but for me, it is the rooms. It is my sponsor. It is a coach like the Pushy Broad or like Tom Gagliano, a power greater than myself, because my brain is still filled with stinking thinking. All right. I have people always say to me, I don't want to go to treatment. I don't want to sit in the rooms. It's a cult. My brain is going to be washed. It's a brainwashing situation, in which case I always say your brain needs washing, because
And
it is totally screwed up with a lot of mess and a lot of dirt that you just have to get clean. Period. The end. Right. So let's move on a little bit more and let's talk about something in the book that I want to call your attention to. Tell me about the warden in your book. The Problem Was Me. What was that about?
when you feel like you don't matter to your parents and you grow up with dysfunction, you develop an inner critic, a fictitious character that sits on your shoulder, sabotages your intimacy you have. Because what I believe is addiction is an intimacy substitute. Instead of going for people for your nurturing needs, you've learned, your brain has told you, don't go there. Let's find something else to distract, like an addiction. So this warden is this inner critic constantly telling you you're not good enough. People pleasers, constantly telling you if you say no, you're a bad person. Caretakers, if you don't take care of others, you're doing something wrong. A recovering addict, you're not good enough, you're defective. This fictitious character will sabotage your life. This warden unleashes a tsunami of negative thoughts and voices throughout your whole life until you challenge it with the help of other people. Because, Ellen, recovery is a we process. It's not a me process. I can't do this alone. My best thinking's got me here. It's got me in trouble. I cannot let my best thinking guide me. And the warden is that 10-foot giant, could be the voice of your father, your mother, somebody who's telling you you're just not good enough. And until you challenge that, you're going to listen to that imagined fears that he's going to tell you that you have.
You're absolutely right. As far as I'm concerned, for me, I tell my clients, you're playing old tapes. Who do those tapes belong to? They're not your tapes. They're the tapes that you've listened to from your mother, from your father, from your siblings, wherever you got those instances. Because I do also believe that addiction, the opposite of active addiction, is connection, just like you said. And being connected means that we are in this together and we learn new ways and new ways of moving forward. So that's great. So let's go back to the beginning of this, where you talk about the impact of childhood messages. Tell us why it's so important to become aware of these messages, and then reflect a little bit about your son.
Here you go. 8 years old, we're watching a baseball game with my son. Real quick story. He said, Dad, how come the kids in the stand are rooting so hard for their favorite baseball player? I said, well, that's the heroes. And his little 8-year-old mind, he's thinking this. He comes back and he goes, Dad, they may be my heroes someday, but you're always going to be my first hero. We are our children's first heroes, whether we want that responsibility or not. It's not just the messages we give our children, but what are the messages we see our mom and dad or caregivers giving each other? What version of intimacy are we watching? Are they running away, shutting down, running to addictions? Are they getting angry? That's ingrained in us, Ellen. And in our adult life, when we get into emotional situations with our spouse partner, those old time traveling, I call it, will come back into play. We'll see what we saw, the version of intimacy we witnessed, and we are going to play that out. You know, many people, their version of intimacy is not love, trust, beauty, amazing. A lot of us who had a tough childhood, our version of intimacy is fear, pain, run away, don't go near, sabotage. We got to challenge that. And when I help couples, I tell them you're not only in a relationship with your partner, but you're in a relationship with their childhood messages as well. And they're in a relationship with your childhood messages as well. Don't forget that. The more you're aware of that, the more you understand not what's said, but what isn't said.
You're absolutely right. It's very important for them to be aware. So how do they begin to look for these messages? How do you help them do this?
Well, I go back to what were the messages you received in childhood when you were angry, when you were upset, when you saw something was wrong with your parents. Tell me what it was like. What did you want to hear from your parents? Like, it's okay, kid, I'm there for you. It's going to be okay. To feel like it's okay. I tell parents all the time, you don't have to agree with your child's feelings. But if a child doesn't feel like their feelings are validated, they won't feel like they're validated. Even if you disagree, you give them consequences. If you choose not to clean your room, you choose not to get your allowance, we got to give them consequences based on choices. But we have to also help them understand that their feelings are important, that they matter. Growing up, again, my father called me a little girl when I shared my feelings with him. And if I can give you one quick story where I changed that with my son, we had to put our dog to sleep. And my son grew up with that dog, my oldest, 10 years old. And I walked him to his room and I saw he was very, very sad. I did something, Ellen, that was very uncomfortable for me. I never witnessed this. I put his arms around me and I put his head on my chest and he cried. And my God, he cried his eyes out. What I was doing that day, I was giving my son a safe place, a place to cry in his father's arms. It was a place I never had as a kid, but I knew he needed this. He needed permission to share his feelings and not hold them back. My God, I wish I had that. And that little example, as I grew up with my family, I never was able to share my feelings. I was afraid. I was scared. So what did I do? I went to addictions as a mean to medicate those feelings.
And now, because you've overcome this and because you have turned it around, and we know 12th step is giving back, and you've gone through schooling that you didn't want to go through, and you had certainly what appeared to be a closure moment with your father and maybe an epiphany for you to move in the right direction.
Absolutely.
You have now devoted your life to helping other people. So talk to us a little bit about, number one, where people can find you if they want to work with you.
Well, everything is centered around my first book, The Problem Was Me. They can go to theproblemwasme.com and they can go on my website, leave me a message. If you want my podcast, you put in The Problem Was Me in Spotify. You can listen to that. My book's The Problem Was Me. So it's kind of easy. I figured, and it's easy for me because I'm still a dinosaur with the computer. You give me too many links, I'm in a lot of trouble. So that's why I kept it all there.
How long have you been doing coaching, Tom?
I would say about 10 years now. Coaching for 10 years. I got out of the world of business about 20 years ago. And yeah, it's been coaching. And, Ellen, there's nothing that brings me more satisfaction and love. Not only when I help the person, but when I know that that person is going to give positive messaging to his children, that they could then give to their children and their children. This is why I say how important this is. There's nothing that makes me happier when couples or clients, individuals, or in group, and they say, I said to my son, hey, are you okay? What can I do to help you? I'm here for you. I'm telling you, it can make me cry.
That certainly is a wonderful thing. So talk to us about what's on the horizon for you. A third book in the works? What's happening?
Yeah, I wrote a third book. My second book is called Don't Put Your Crap in Your Kid's Diaper.
I love that.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't mean to say I'm bashing parents, but it's important for us to look back on our childhood and look at what messages we want to hold on to that's helped us, and maybe recognize what messages need to be challenged a little bit. And that's what the second book is about. The third book I wrote, and I'm in the process of finding an editor, and it's more of an intimacy book for couples. I don't know. That's what I'm up to right now. And yeah, I'm looking to get back to speaking. I was doing very well before COVID, but like a lot of people, COVID took care of that one. But I'm trying to get myself back on track again. Thank you for asking.
You are doing a wonderful job for sure. All right, we have about 30 seconds left. I want you to leave people with a really good message based on childhood imagery and childhood messages. Tell us what you want us to know. What's positive?
I want you to know that whatever happened to you in your childhood was not your fault. But if you don't take responsibility for healing that, you're the one that's going to suffer. You're going to drink a lot of poison down. Remember something, recovery could be painful in the beginning. And if you wait till you feel like doing it, if you wait till you want to do it, you may never do it. Take the step to put your feet where it should be. Trust the process enough until you start to feel the rewards of recovery. And I say this in all my podcasts. Take what you can that you can use here, leave the rest. You don't have to agree with everything I said. It's not what I'm about. If you can get a few nuggets of wisdom, take them with you. But remember, get your feet to places it should be, even when your head tells you not to.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate your time with us today. This is Tom Gagliano. The Problem Was Me. You can find him on theproblemwasme.com, and you can go to Amazon Books and find The Problem Was Me and his other book as well, and the third one coming out shortly. You can also go to pushybroadfromthebronx.com or call me at 800-889-1757, and I'll be glad to give you more information. And you can make an appointment to do some coaching with me as well. This is the Pushy Broad from the Bronx saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening, and remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, New York.
Views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the station, its management, or advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk